Auth.js version 5 has some breaking changes that might make you confused, but don't worry. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how you can set up Auth.js version 5 with a Next.js version 14 project from scratch. First, I will configure the Next-Auth version 5 with Google Provider as well as the Credentials Provider. And then I'm going to show you how you can protect your client component pages as well as the server component pages. And lastly, I'm going to show you how you can protect your pages with Next-Auth version 5 middleware. Welcome to Sakura Dev channel, and without further ado, let's get right into it. Okay, I open up a brand new Next.js version 14 project, and here in the first step we need to install the Next-Auth version 5. So I open up the terminal, okay, and here I'm going to say npm install Next-Auth @beta. Okay, this will install the Next-Auth version 5 for us. Okay, it is installed, and in the next step we need to create an Auth.js file in the root path of our project. So I close the terminal here, and now inside the root path of our project, I'm going to create a file called Auth.js. Actually, the name of this file is up to you. And here in the first step, we need to import type nextauth config from the nextauth. And then here, I'm going to create a config object. So here I'm going to say const config and then set it to an object and say that it satisfies the nextauth config type. And then inside the object, I'm going to specify the providers here. Okay, so providers, as you may know, are the specific ways of the authentication in the Next-Auth. For example, you can configure Google Provider in which users can sign in into your application with their Google account or GitHub or Twitter and so on. And also you can configure the Credentials Provider in which users can sign in into your application with their own username and password. So in this tutorial, I'm going to configure the Google Provider as well as the Credentials Provider here. So the first one is the Google Provider. So we need to import the Google Provider from the nextauth/providers/Google. And we name it Google here. And then here we can pass it inside the providers list. Okay. And here in the version 5, we don't need to pass the Google Client ID and Google Client secret directly inside the Google Provider. We can create an env file here. So in the root path of our application, I'm going to create a .env file, .env.local, okay, and then inside this file we can put our Google Client secret and Google Client ID, and the Next-Auth version 5 automatically infer them from the env file, providing that they are started with the auth prefix. So as you can see here, the env variable should start with the auth prefix in the uppercase, and there underscore the name of the provider. Again, it should be in the uppercase, and then underscore ID or secret. So if you name your env variable with this pattern, the Next-Auth version 5 automatically infer their values and configure your provider. So in our case, we are going to use the Google Provider. So here, name of the env variable should be something like this: auth and then underscore Google, name of the provider, okay, and then underscore ID, and also auth underscore Google secret, okay. So we need to put these two env variable inside the .env.local file. So let's copy the first one and go to the VS Code and .env.local file and put it here, okay, and put the second one, which is auth underscore Google underscore secret. Okay, now we need to go to the Google API console and create a project, and from the project get the value of the Google ID and Google secret. So I go to the Google API console. Okay, here I'm going to click on the create project here. We need to name the project, then name it Sakura Dev Tutorial, okay, and then click on the create here and waiting for the project to be created, okay, and then click on the select project here, and then here I'm going to click on the API and services. First we need to click on the OAuth consent screen and configure the consent screen here. I'm going to click on the external here, okay, and then click on create. We can put the name of the app. I'm going to go ahead with the Sakura Dev Tutorial again, okay, put the user support email, and also here put the developer email address. I'm going to go ahead with the same email address and click on the save and continue, and again click on the save and continue, and again save and continue. Okay, now we can back to the dashboard, okay, and then click on the publish app. It's very important you should click on the publish app, otherwise you can't use this service here. Okay, so I click on the confirm here, and then in the next step I'm going to go to the credentials here, okay, and then click on the create credentials. I'm going to select the OAuth client ID, and here in the application type I'm going to select the web application, and on the name of the application again I'm going to go ahead with the Sakura dev tutorial. Okay, and here we need to click on the authorized redirect URIs, and here in the authorized redirect URIs, since we are using the Google provider, we need to put the URIs something like this. If we are in the production mode, we put the HTTPS and then your domain and then /API/auth/callback and then /Google. But since our Next.js project is now on the development environment, we need to put something like this: HTTP and then /localhost 3000, the address of our dev server, and then /API/auth/callback and then /Google. So let's copy this URI and get back to the Google API console and put it here in the authorized redirect URIs. Okay, so after the authentication with the Google provider is successful, the Google API will call this API from our application and send the user information to this API. So we need to put it here exactly like this: /API/auth and then /callback/Google. Okay, so now let's click on the create here, and now we can copy the client ID and go to the VS Code, and here in the auth Google ID I'm going to paste the Google client ID that we've got from the Google API console. And let's get back to the browser and copy the client secret here, okay, and get back to the VS Code and paste it here in front of the auth Google secret. Okay, so that's it for the configuring the Google provider. Let's close the env file and get back to the Auth.js. As you can see, we just need to send the Google provider inside the providers list of the Next-Auth config object. That's it. The Next-Auth version 5 will infer Google client ID and Google client secret from the env file that we've just created. Okay, we just need to follow the naming convention that I've just mentioned. Okay, so now let's move on, and now here we can export the handlers from this file. So here I'm going to say export const and object, and let's set the object to the Next-Auth function that comes from the Next-Auth. Okay, as you can see, it is imported from the Next-Auth, and we just need to pass the config object that we have created earlier. Okay, so I'm going to pass it to the Next-Auth function, and now here we can destructure the handler, also the auth, which is a very important function and is one of the breaking changes that is offered by the Next-Auth version 5. Okay, and then destructure the sign-in function and also the sign-out function. And now here we need to create a catch-all API route handler for the Next-Auth. Okay, so as you might notice here, in the version 5, we have separated the configurations object from the Next-Auth catch-all route and put it inside the Auth.js file in the root path of our application. So now let's go to the app directory and create the API routes for the Next-Auth. So I'm going to create the API directory and then auth. Okay, it should be /API/auth, and then the catch-all route of the Next-Auth inside the square brackets. I'm going to put 3 dots here and then Next-Auth. It should be Next-Auth. So pay attention to the spelling here, and then inside this directory I'm going to create the route handler, route.ts file. Okay, so this will be the catch-all API routes of the Next-Auth. First we need to import the handlers from the auth file that we have just exported from. Okay, you can see here we export the handlers from the auth.ts file, and here in the Next-Auth catch-all route we need to import the handlers. Okay, as you can see, it is a really long path for the auth file. So let's go to the tsconfig.json file, and here let's create a alias path for the auth.ts file. So here I'm going to gonna say auth. Okay, it's an alias for the auth.ts file, and it will be on ./auth.ts file. Okay, so let's save this, and now we can go to the Next-Auth catch-all routes and just replace this path with just auth. And now in this file, we just need to export the get and post function from the handlers object. So here I'm going to say export const distraction object and set it to handlers. Okay, and extract the get and post from the handlers object. That's it for the route handler of the Next-Auth. As you can see, it is much simpler than the version 4. In the version 4, we needed to put the configuration that we have put inside the auth.ts file here into this route handler. But in the version 5, we just need to export the get and post from the handlers that we exported from the auth.ts file. We separate the configurations and put them inside the auth.ts file. Okay, so now let's see how we can use the Next-Auth in order to protect our application from unauthenticated users. So first we need to create an app bar for our application, and then we will put the sign in and sign up button in the app bar of our application. So in the app directory, I'm going to create a new file called appbar.tsx. Okay, and here inside it, let's create a React component. Okay, and then here in the root div of our app bar, let's put some class name here. I'm going to put some padding here and a gradient background. Okay, so inside this div, I'm going to create another div here, and in the class name I'm going to use the ml_auto for pushing this div all the way to the right of the app bar. Okay, so as you can see here, we have the flex inside the parent div, and the margin left auto will send this div all the way to the right of the app bar. Okay, so inside this div here, we need to check if the user is authenticated, put the name of the user and a sign up button, and if the user is not authenticated, just put a sign in button. So first we need to check if the user is authenticated or not. How we can do that? We can check it with the auth function. So first let's make this app bar component async component. So now it's a async server component, and then here inside the app bar we can retrieve the session of the Next-Auth with the auth function. So here I'm going to say const session and then set it to await and the auth function that comes from the auth.ts file. So let's get back to the auth.ts file. You can see we have exported the auth function from the auth.ts file. So back to the appbar.tsx, here as you can see we have retrieved the session of the Next-Auth with the auth function. Okay, now here inside this div we can check if the session is existed and session has a user inside it. Okay, we can render a div here. Okay, and then inside the first div we're going to put the username, so I render a p tag here. Okay, and here I'm going to render session.user.name. Okay, and then here after that we're going to render a sign out button. So since this is a server component, we can't use a button with the on-click event. So in order to avoid making this component a client component, we're going to render a form here and then a submit button inside it, and then set the action events of the form element. So in this way we can keep the app bar component a server component. Okay, so let's create form here, and here let's create a button. Okay, so let's format this JSX. Now inside the form here, let's create a button and let's set the caption to sign out. Okay, and let's set the type of the button to submit. Okay, and now inside the form elements we can set the action events. We can put a function here. It should be an async. Okay, and then inside it first we're going to mark it with the use server, so now it's a server action, and then we can await the sign out function that comes from the auth file. Okay, so as you remember, we have exported the sign out function from the auth file. Let's save this, and if the session is not existed or the user is not existed inside the session, it means that the user is not authenticated. So in this way here we need to render a sign in button. So here in the second case which the user is unauthenticated. Again, render a form here, and inside it we're gonna render a button again and set its type to submit. Okay, and let's set the caption to sign in, and then here we set the action event to an async function. Okay, so we do that because we don't want to make this component to a client component. We're gonna keep it as a server component, so we need to set the action event with a server action. So again, let's mark this function with useServer. Okay, and then await the sign in function that comes from the auth file. Okay, so let's save this, and now this will be a part of our component. And now let's go to the root layout of our application, and here above the children of the root layout we're gonna put the app bar that we've just created. Okay, let's save this, and now let's run the application with npm run dev. Let's open it up in our browser. Okay, so let's go to the browser. You can see we have the app bar here, and there is a sign in button here. So if I click on the sign in here, it will send us to the default sign in of the Next.Auth, which will be created by the Next.Auth itself. We can also have a custom sign in page. We have, I think, 2 or 3 videos about how we can create a custom sign in page for the Next.Auth. You can watch these videos if you want. The procedure is the same with the Next.Auth version 4. So here, if I click on the sign in with Google here, you can see we have a configuration error. So that's because we didn't create the auth secret variable inside our local env file. So let's get back to the VS Code here. Okay, let's close off the terminal, and inside the .env.local file, we need to create another variable prefixed with the uppercase auth and then underscore secret. Okay, so this will be the secret key of the Next.Auth, and with this secret key, Next.Auth can turn the session of the Next.Auth into a JWT and keep it inside the server. So let's put a random string here. If you are on a Linux machine, you can use the OpenSSL to create a random secret key for the auth secret. So let's save this. Okay, so now let's open up the terminal and restart the server. Okay, and click on the sign in here, sign in with Google. And you can see now we can go to the Sakura Dev tutorials. I'm choose one of the email address here. Okay, and for the first one, I click on the continue here. Now we can see the name of the user here inside the app bar and then a sign out button. So now let's get back to the app bar components. Okay, let's close the terminal and go to the app bar components here inside the first div where we render the name of the user. Let's put a class name here and add a flex class and gap2. Let's save this and get back to the browser. We can see now the name of the user here and a sign out button. So if I click on the sign out, you can see the name of the user is now gone, and instead a sign in button is shown in the app bar. So again, let's click on the sign in with Google. Let's choose the account, and again we can see my name here and the sign out button. So in this way we can log in into the application with the Google provider of the Next.Auth. Now let's configure the credentials provider in the Next.Auth version 5. Okay, so let's go to the Auth.js file, and here inside this file, first we need to import the credentials provider from the Next.Auth/providers/credentials. Okay, and then here before the config object, I'm going to create another config object and name it credentials config. So here I'm going to say const credentials config, okay, and set it to credentials provider that we have just imported from the Next.Auth providers, and then passing configuration object here into the credentials provider function. So here the first property we're going to set is the name. We're going to set it to credentials, okay, and the next one is to create the credentials object. So here I'm going to specify the credentials object and set it to an object here. So what is this credentials object? It has two main purposes. The first one is to define the shape of our credential. For example, we want to say that our users must have the username and password in order to be able to sign in with the credentials provider. You might want to specify the email and password as the credentials of your user, but I'm going to go ahead with the username and password. So the first purpose of this credentials object, it defines the credentials properties. It has the username and password inside, okay? And the second purpose of this credentials object is that you can specify the type and the shape of the inputs inside the sign-in page of the Next-Auth. So here in this object, we can specify the label, the type, and other properties of the inputs inside the sign-in page for the credentials provider. So the first property is the user name. Again, the name is up to you. You can set it to email, for example, or whatever you want. Okay, now we can specify the properties of the username input inside the Next-Auth sign-in page. So here we can specify the label and set it to user name. Okay, so now the label of the username input inside the sign-in page is the user name, and then we're going to specify the password. Okay, and now inside the password object we can specify the label for the password. We can set it to the password. Okay, and also we can specify the type of the input, and we're going to say it is a password type input. Okay, so now this is for the credentials object, and next we're going to define the authorize function inside the credentials config. So here after the credentials object, I'm going to define an async function authorize, okay, and it gets the credentials as its parameter. Okay, so the type of this credentials will be inferred from the credentials object. It has the username and password inside it. Okay, now we're going to define the body of the authorize function. So what is this authorize function? When the user click on the sign in button in the sign in page, the username and password will be packed as a credentials object and will be sent to this authorize function. And in this authorize function, we need to decide whether username and password is correct or not. If these credentials are correct, we need to return a user object associated with the username and password that user provided in the sign-in page. And if the credentials are not correct, we can just return null from this authorize function. And returning null from this authorize function means that the user is not authenticated or authentication has failed. So we need to decide if the credentials are correct or not. In the real world scenarios where we have a separate backend server, we need to call the login API of the backend server and send the credentials to it and wait for the response. The backend gets the credentials and checks inside its database whether such a user is existed or not, and if that's the case, it will return the user object, and then we can return it from this authorize function. If we use the Next.js as a full stack project, usually we have a database and we can access it inside the Next.js with some ORMs like Prisma or Drizzle ORM. So here in this authorize function, we're going to check inside our database if such a user is existed or not. But here in this tutorial, in order to keep it simple, we don't want to create a database with Prisma or Drizzle ORM. Just naively check the username and password with some hard-coded predefined username and password. So here we can say if credentials.username equals to, for example, sk, our predefined hard-coded user, and its password, credentials.password equals to, for example, 123, we can allow user to sign in into our application. So we just return a user object here, okay, and set its name to my name, okay, and else we just return null from this authorize function. So we're going to keep it simple. You can watch my previous videos. I have completely explained the authorize function with the real world scenario. I have configured the Prisma database and check inside the database whether the user is existed or not, and then check the provided password with the hashed version of the password inside our database with the bcrypt library. But here let's go with this simple authorize function. Okay, so now we can put this credentials config object into the providers of the Next-Auth. So here in the config object here, we can add the credentials config here. And now let's go to the browser. Let's sign out first. Then if I click on the sign in, you can see our sign in page has a a sign in with credentials option inside it. And we can sign in into our application either with our Google account or with our username and password. So first, let's go ahead with some wrong username and password, SKK for example, a wrong username, and click on the sign in, and you can see the sign in is failed message. So now let's go ahead with the right username and password, okay, and click on the sign in credentials. You can see my name here in the app part of our application. So in this way we can configure Credentials Provider and allow the users to sign in into our application with a username and password. Okay, so in this section, I'm going to show you how you can protect your pages with the Next-Auth version 5. First, I'm going to show you how you can protect your client component page. And then in the next section, I'm going to show you how you can protect your server component pages. And in the last section, I'm going to show you how you can use middleware to protect any page you want with ease. So now let's create a client component page and then protect it from an authenticated user with Next-Auth version 5. Okay, so here I'm going to go to the app directory, and here I'm going to create a new page, and I'm going to name it client page. Okay, and then inside it we're going to create a page.tsx file. Let's create a component here. Inside it we can say this is a client page and must be protected. Okay, and now let's go to the app bar, and here let's create a link for this page. I'm going to use the next link here. Okay, I'm going to set the caption to client page. Okay, and then set the href to /client page. Okay, and let's get back to the browser. You can see the client page here, and I'm going to click on the client page. You can see this is a client page and must be protected. So if I sign out here and then get back to the home page and click on the client page, you can see even though we are signed out, we still can access to the client page. So here, let's protect this page from unauthenticated user. So I go to the VS Code, and here inside the client page, we're going to use the use session hook in order to access to the session of the Next-Auth in client component. So here I'm going to say const for now an object and set it to use session hook that comes from the Next-Auth/React. Okay, and then here from the object we're going to rename the data to the session. So now we can access to the session of the Next-Auth, and since we are using the use session hook, we need to mark it with the use client directive. Okay, and here we can check if session is not existed or session is existed but there is not user inside it. So session.user is not existed. We can just return a custom message, for example div here, and say you need to sign in. Okay, let's put some class name here, text red 500 and a padding p, for example 5. Okay, so let's save this, and this will not work. So let's see, we have an error, and that's because in order to access to the use session hook, we need to wrap our application with the session provider. So as you might know, the use session hook is just a React context API, so we need to wrap the application with the session provider, and then we will be able to access to the use session hook. So let's go to the VS Code, and in the app directory let's create a providers component. Okay, and then here let's create a component providers. Okay, and these providers must take the children as its props. So here let's have the children, and let's set its type to type here. It has the children, which is going to be a React node. Okay, and here let's remove this div here and change it to a session provider, which comes from the Next-Auth/React, and then inside it we're going to render its children. Okay, and here we need to mark it with the use client, so it's a client component. Okay, and now let's go to the root layout of our application, and here let's wrap all the pages and component of the application with the providers component that we have just created. Okay, so now we can access to the use session hook inside any client component page that we want. And here notice that this providers component is a client component, and you might ask, wrapping all the children of our application inside the client components providers doesn't make all application to a client component? And the answer is no. We still can have several components in our application wrapped by a client component. So for more information about this, you can watch this video. But here I want to say that this will not make the whole application to a client component. We can still have our server component, as you will see in the next section. So now let's go back to the browser. Okay, you can see here in the client page we are not signed in, and you can see this message here, you need to sign in, and the main content of the page is not shown to user. So if I click on the sign in and provide our username and password, now we can see the main content of the page is now shown to the user because we are signed in into our application. So in this way we can protect the client component pages from the unauthenticated user. Now let's create a server component page and see how we can protect it from the unauthenticated user. So let's get back to the VS Code, and here inside the app directory I'm going to create another page, server page, and inside it we're going to create page.tsx file. Okay, and here let's create a component, and here in the main div I'm going to say this is a server page and must be protected. Okay, so this is a server component and we can't use the use session hook to retrieve this session. Instead, we're going to use the auth function from the auth file. So here first we need to turn it to an async component. Okay, and say const session and set it to await auth. Okay, the auth is coming from the auth file. And in this way, we can access to the session of the Next-Auth server side. No need to the get server session from the version 4, and no need to path any auth option inside it. And I think that is easier in the version 5 to access to the session in the server side. Okay, so now let's get to the client page. The rest is the same. Let's copy this from the client page, and here let's paste it inside the server page. Okay, so as you can see, if this session is not existed or there is not user inside this session, we can return a div that say you need to sign in. Okay, so now let's save this and let's go to the app bar and put a link for the server page. Okay, name it to server page and set its address to /server page. Okay, let's save this, and now let's go to the browser. First let's sign out. Let's go to the server page. I think I misspelled the address of the page, so let's get back to the VS Code. Here we have the, we misspelled the server page here. Let's put the R here, server page. Let's get back to the browser. We can see now we are in the server page, and the message is you need to sign in the server page. So if I click on the sign in, okay, put the username and password, you can see now this is a server page and must be protected. This is the main content of the page and is shown to the user because we are signed in into our application. So in this way, we can easily protect our server component pages from unauthenticated users. Okay, now let's protect our pages with Next-Auth middleware. So now let's go to the VS Code, and here inside the app directory, I'm going to create a page for testing the middleware. I'll name it middleware protected. Okay, and then inside it, I'm going to create the page.tsx. Okay, let's create a page here, and inside the main div, let's say this page is protected by middleware. Okay, let's save this, and now let's go to the app bar, and here let's create a link for this middleware page. I'm going to set the caption to middleware protected page and set the href to the /middleware protected. Let's save this, and here inside the root path of our application, let's create a middleware file, middleware.ts. Okay, and here let's export the auth as middleware, and this auth is from the auth file. Okay, so we just export the auth as as the middleware in this file. Let's save this, and then we need to go to the auth file, and here inside the config object we need to specify the callbacks object here, and inside it we need to define the authorize function. Okay, it takes the request and auth as its parameter. It's a little different from the middleware in the version 4. So here we need to specify on which path we want to use the middleware. Okay, so here inside the body of the authorize function, first we need to extract the path name from the URL of the request. So here I'm going to say const, and here an object here and set it to request.next URL. Okay, and then we can extract the path name, and here we can say if the path name equals to /middleware protected, we can turn the auth to a boolean and return it from the authorize function. So we just put 2 exclamation marks to turn the auth to a boolean. Otherwise, we just return true. Okay, so in this way, we are saying that if the path name equals to middleware protected route, we turn the auth to a boolean and return it from this authorize function. The type of the auth is the session. So if the session is existed, the auth will be true, and if it's not, which means that the user is not authenticated, the auth will be turned to false value and returned as a false value from this authorized function. So again, first we check if the path name is middleware protected, which means that the middleware should be enforced with this path. We just check if the session is existed, we return true, otherwise we return false. And if the path is not middleware protected, which means that we don't need to protect the page, we just return true and allow user to go ahead and access the page because this is not a protected page. So I hope you guys get the idea. If you have any question about that, you can ask me in the comment section below. So now let's go to the browser. You can see we are not signed in here, and if I click on the middleware protected page, you can see we are headed to the sign in page automatically. So let's log in into our application. You can see now the protected page by middleware is now shown to the user because we are signed in. So if I signed out and then want to go to the middleware protected page, you can see we are headed to the sign in page automatically. So in this way we can protect our pages without needing to do extra work inside our pages. We just need to specify the path name of the pages inside the authorize function. Okay, so that will brings us to the end of this video, and in the next video I'm going to show you how we can upgrade a full-fledged project with Next-Auth version 4 to the Next-Auth version 5. So if you haven't subscribed to my channel, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button because it will give me more energy to move forward. Have a nice time. Stay tuned for my next video. Bye bye.